Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Saturday at 11:53. Kind of all overcast day. Kind of nice out. It was supposed to rain today, but it's not raining right now. It rained a little bit this morning, but anyway, hope everyone's doing good. We had a real fun quantum show last night at Hot Hill Tavern. I played with my great friends Ronnie and Halsey. And there was a fourth guy who played who I never met before, and he was pretty amazing. He was this guy from Lincoln, Maine, all the way up north. 3 hour drive or so for him. But he did this like whole show where it was just drums and guitar and vocals, and it was like a one man kind of punk show. The music was super funny and kind of dark and just really hilarious. And so it was a real interesting bill, like of having all three of our bands, which are definitely electronica based stuff. Ronnie does this music that's very ambient, kind of has a really cool atmosphere. It's all improvised. The set that he did last night was all improvised, but really cool. It's got a little bit of a hip hop vibe to it, a reggae vibe to it at times. It's kind of more kind of like down tempo stuff. And then we did our set, and each band played for about 40 minutes or so. And then Halsey played, and he does like real kind of mid tempo hip hop, kind of electro stuff. And it was great. And then top it off with this guy from Lincoln, who was just great. And so it was a pretty wild, interesting bill of music, and a lot of music that went on. So it was cool. And then Ronnie and I are going to be playing again, doing kind of the same thing. We're going to be playing next weekend, a week from today at Opera House Video. And we're going to be playing during the day at it's an early show. We're going to be playing at like 1:30 in the afternoon. And I've done two other shows at Opera House Video last year, and then I think we did one this year, and it was super fun. I mean, we did one where we played early in the day. It was just us, and that was fun. And then we played another time where it was me and my friend Leo, who I play in the band Osmia. Osmia is playing tonight at Hey Sailor, so if you're around, please come on by. We're opening up for this really cool band called Sea Peoples from Portland. So that's tonight. But the last time we played a show at Opera House Video, we played with Leo, who is the guitar player and main songwriter for Osmia, and that was cool. That was a nighttime show, and that was a pretty cool billing. This is going to be a little bit different. We're going to go back to trying a show early in the day. It starts at 1:30, and we're going to do kind of this had this idea of like a round robin thing where we're going to like trade off sets. Like we're going to do maybe 20 minutes, half hour, whatever, and just go like back and forth. I got this idea a few months ago when I went to a songwriter showcase at Hey Sailor. I had a friend who was playing at it, and it was like a round robin thing where they basically had about five or six performers, and they set them all. Everybody, it was all acoustic and vocals, acoustic guitar and vocals, and they all were set up at the same time at on stage at Hey Sailor, and it was like a Thursday night, and it was actually really cool, and I really loved the idea, the way the music kind of transitioned back and forth from one artist to the next. And basically, what they did is they just kind of went down the line, and each singer played a song, and then they just kind of went down the line and just kept rotating. So they kept like switching, and it was cool because it like would change the mood a lot, and it was kind of this cool interaction. So I thought, huh, maybe that might be a cool thing to try in the context of our music with another artist. So that's what we're gonna attempt to do and see how it goes. And so there'll be a bunch of promotion coming up. I've been promoting it, but there'll be a bunch more coming up really soon. So thanks again. So today's show is on a movie that I saw on Thursday night that I've been wanting to get to talk about. I had a couple friends that asked me about going to see this new Paul Rudd movie called Friendship. It's an A24. I'd say it's a comedy. It's a black comedy, and we saw it at the Strand in Rockland, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous theater, right in downtown Rockland, Maine. It's definitely one of the best theaters around. It's got just it's a beautiful spot. We're really fortunate here in Midcoast to have really great kind of art facilities, great opera houses, and we have well, beautiful parks, and we have awesome restaurants, and we have some really cool venues, and we have some really killer movie theaters locally. So it's pretty awesome. The Waldo Theater being another one that's just spectacular. So I went on Thursday to see Friendship, which just came out. I think it came out maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. So since it's been a few days since I've seen Friendship, there's kind of a lot to talk about with this movie, and as well as A24 movies. I'm a big fan of a lot of their films. They really did some really cool things early on with like launching the career of Ari Aster, with Hereditary, and they've done some really cool, interesting movies, and they get labeled as this kind of you know high end kind of elevated horror label, where they put out a lot of films that they have put out a pretty decent amount of horror films, but they get labeled as this like elevated horror, which is, I don't know, it's so, I think it's just kind of silly to even say that, but you know, good horror is good horror, good action is good action, or it's not. Good comedies, something's going to be funny or it's not going to be funny. But I think we like to use categories all the time now because there's so much stuff out there. There's so much content. There's so many different genres, and there is this thing of which has happened in cultural, as far as like a way to look at this thing called cross pollination, where there's obviously less borders with things, and people have to a degree, a more or just a bigger space to be exposed to so much more and varied content, whether it's film or music. And there's less, there's more of a thing of where, I guess at one point, in the decades past, it was harder to find of where you could find a movie or a piece of art where it blended multiple styles, in music as well. But that those chains have kind of been, kind of cut away, and you see that more and more now, where there's certain artists out there that will blend, pick things from various genres, and they might be, say, a rock band or a jazz group, or a director, say like Ari Aster, for instance, where at one point, the artist would have made a straightforward rock album, with some of those trappings that we expect, or a jazz group would do the same thing, and a horror director would do the same thing, like things that we expect, more or less the tropes that we expect in that particular genre. But now I think with there being, with the internet, and just there being, less barriers around, and even to a degree taboos of like blending styles, we're seeing that now culturally in art, where there's less of those barriers. So I feel like you're starting to see a lot of things kind of overlap, and now it's okay, and you can see it in quote unquote jazz albums to have like electronic elements and things that are not typically what you hear in jazz. Like there's this cross pollination, and you see it in horror, where there's horror films that kind of blend other genres. Hereditary is a great example of that, because at the core of that movie, it's more of a melodrama. It's a family drama, and the dressing, everything outside of that is very much a horror film. So you're seeing that more and more in art. And I remember hearing that term quite a few years ago, cross pollination, where now there's, because, and I think it's really due to the digital age that we live in. I mean, everything is at we can access anything through our phones, or wherever, any kind of device. So the amount of information out there is kind of staggering how quick you can get it, and there's less of a barrier. And I think really affected our culture. And again, there's a lot of negatives and there's a lot of positives, but I think on the positive side, it's really certain artists in their respective fields will now feel like naturally inclined to blend other styles. Where at one point it's like, no, you can't really do that, or this is a more of a straight ahead jazz record, or this is like more of a this is going to be a straight edge kind of horror film. We can't really incorporate a drama per se kind of template into this film or production. So I think it's really changed a lot, and so which I think is good. I think the less barriers, the better, and you know, and there's been so many things that have come that have set standards. Like it's like stand the whole notion of you're standing on the shoulder of giants. Where people have often said in art where everything has been done before, so it's just kind of reciprocal, or there's like the cycle of how things that were popular at one point and then go away and then come back, and then a lot of the times it's essentially the retelling of something we've seen before, the a level of familiarity to it, but it's shifted a lot, so there's less of restraints, I think, to a degree. But I also think it's a line, because I think it's a fine line, and again, it's subjective. But I think sometimes, well, okay, I'll use this as an example. Like A24, I think is really great in a lot of ways because they do cultivate that. They do cultivate those things around blending. Take a film, for instance. Well, I'm talking about Hereditary, for instance, where that's not. It's definitely a horror film, but it has a very different feel. It really does take elements from dramas, and so at the core, it's really a family dynamic. It's not something you typically see in a horror film, and a lot of A24's horror films are kind of like that, where they'll blend all of these other genres, and they will the directors and the filmmakers will somewhat come up with somewhat inventive ways to kind of maybe even tell a story that we've seen before. But it's a fine line, I think. Sometimes what I'm starting to feel now, and that's what I've always respected at A24, is that they've really, you know, got behind directors and, put out films that take creative risks because of this kind of cross pollination, if you will. But I think there's a fine line, because sometimes they are looked at from certain folks as being kind of very pretentious with some of the films that they put out, and where and maybe it goes it because the idea of taking such a risk gets in the way of just telling a good story. And I have always been kind of in the camp of where I rather have this great company like A24 put out movies that are pretty innovative, pretty interesting, kind of reinventing the wheel, filmmakers and films that are not afraid to take some chances and blend other genres and all of these things. And I've seen that a lot with their films, but I'm starting to think sometimes with some of the films I've been seeing of theirs where it seems like maybe they're some of these films they're just trying to take a risk, and it seems like it's not like organic, and it can kind of get in the way of like just good storytelling, where just telling a good story and introducing some really interesting characters, as opposed to like, well, we gotta be different, we gotta be, we have to show things from a different angle all the time. We have to blend all of these other colors. We gotta throw all these things on the canvas. We have to be different. We have to stand out. And to me, I'm starting to feel with A24 is that they are kind of going in that direction. And again, it's just my opinion, but I'm starting to feel now that they are really. they're kind of getting in their own way to that in that capacity, because I feel like it's starting to hinder now, um, people just being able to tell really good stories. And it's you know it's a it's kind of a little bit of a predicament. And I'm starting to, that's kind of been a thing for me as of late with some of their more recent releases. Particularly with Beau is Afraid, and I think to a degree with this new movie. I thought it was good, and this movie is Friendship. It stars Paul Rudd. I didn't know really much about it. My friends Sam and Buffy, who invited me to this movie, and I went with my friend Aaron as well. They had seen this movie before, and they said that this movie was really great. And they felt a real fatigue around A24 movies, and they felt that this movie really um, kind of rejuvenated them, their interest in these kinds of films, and the films that A24 put out. So this was their second time seeing it, and this was my first time seeing it. Friendship stars Paul Rudd, who I'm a big fan of. I really like Paul Rudd, and pretty much everything I've seen him in, even if it's not the best movie, he's usually really great in it. He's a really great kind of comedian, but I think he's got a lot of ability as an actor. He can pull off drama. Everything I've seen him in, for the most part, he always has some kind of humorous aspect to his characters. But I do like Paul Rudd quite a bit. He's got great stage presence, and he's been really busy lately. He just was in another A24 movie, The Death of a Unicorn, which I haven't seen. But this movie has a pretty cool cast. This movie's really centered on this actor comedian, which I know very little bit about until recently. I've just been checking him out, but it's kind of a movie really where he's like the main character in it, and that is Tim Robinson. Um, Tim Robinson is an actor, comedian. He has a show on Netflix. That's a pretty popular show. He does, I guess it's like a sketch comedy show. And he's kind of looked at as, which I didn't really think was a term. Again, getting back to, um, you know, labels and subgenres, but another form of comedy that's called cringe comedy. Apparently, that's a new thing, and Tim Robinson is looked at as like the number one guy who is like the number one cringe comic, which I guess specializes in just jokes that are not really politically correct. They definitely are a little bit twisted and kind of fucked up, and really everything's really awkward. And that's kind of like his thing. And the rest of the cast is pretty good too. Katie Mara is also in this film. Eiley Wick, Jake Dillon, who plays their son, and John Segara. And the the heart of this movie, it's essentially it's a black comedy, but it's essentially about these two men who meet, Paul Rudd's character, and Tim Robbins' character. They both like strike up this fairly like intense friendship. They all both live in the same kind of real straightforward kind of suburban neighborhood, and they become friends. And a series of events happen of where Paul Rudd doesn't really want Tim Robbins' character to be, he doesn't want to be friends with him anymore because of these uh, crazy circumstances that happen. So he feels really rejected, and it's kind of about like this. He becomes kind of obsessed with him, and can't understand why he doesn't want him as a friend in his life. And he is kind of a mentally disturbed guy, and he's like this really weird, awkward guy who's kind of a jerk. He says like really, inappropriate things to people. He's really funny. He doesn't have any. There's no. There's no filter on his character. Like he'll just say the most, kind of wild and you know insane things to random people, and he'll like get himself into these situations of where he doesn't really necessarily even question his motivation or behavior, and he's just kind of this crazed, weirdo, and he's very awkward, and he doesn't know how to really interact with people, and so the whole story is about him, like his kind of obsession with Paul Rudd's character and what that leads to. And along the way, we get to know his family and his wife and his son. And the movie is pretty funny. And it definitely goes into some darker areas. It's definitely a black comedy. And again, this is like a primetime example of what A24 is doing. Like, I think this movie is beautifully shot. The music for this movie is really, really good. I really enjoyed the music. It's a lot of synth, kind of like synth wave, electronica music. That's very, very cool. That was one of the things I loved about it. The cinematography is really, really cool. It's got this real fresh look to it. It definitely, you could look at this as being a little bit of a film around the idea of like, this the stalker, someone who becomes obsessed with someone else, and it can lead to some very dark things. And that's kind of what this film is about. Like the Cable Guy is an example of that with Jim Carrey. Even like movies that kind of deal, the king of comedy, Robert De Niro, kind of deals with that, obsession, and so it's got a little bit of that feel, and it very much is like put in a kind of a contemporary feel, and someone who is definitely suffering from some form of mental illness and is really like living in this real delusional world. So, that's kind of what this movie is. But again, it's beautifully shot. I had never seen anything that was by this director before, and I guess he's done a few films and a few other shows, I think, and a few other things that Andrew DeYoung. So, and there's moments in this film that are really, really funny, but there's also moments. I don't know, like I had a good time watching this movie, and it was fun. It was very highly stylized, like it had a real fresh look to it. Some cool. The music was awesome. The cinematography, kind of the narrative of the story was kind of interesting. The characters, for the most part, are really good, but it's and there's moments of it that are really funny and definitely, where you have this cringe comedy, if you will, where it's kind of twisted and kind of like totally inappropriate. And there's some really funny, funny moments in it. I saw it in a theater. There were at the Strand, like I said, and there was quite a few people there, and a lot of people were laughing, and it was really funny and made for a fun experience to like, to have to be sitting in an audience and they kind of were into the movie, because sometimes it doesn't happen. But I will say, like now that it's been a few days since I've seen this movie, there's certain things in this movie, especially around the comedy, where I feel like that I don't know. There were certain times, certain things that would happen, certain situations that would happen, and there was like this, and people just started laughing, like, and I just didn't get it at all. And there were a lot of things in this movie, comedy wise, that I didn't think were really funny at all, and I was like, I was a little bit dumbfounded, because there were people sitting behind me, and there was like this jokey kind of thing that was said, and I didn't get it. I didn't think it was very funny. It didn't really go anywhere, and I got the sense that these most of the folks that were at this movie were big fans of Tim Robinson's sense of humor, and there was a lot of comedy. It was mixed. There was certain things in this where I thought they had great chemistry, Paul Rudd and Tim Robinson's character. But I felt like there was some comedy and certain things that were delivered in this movie and said that I just didn't think were really funny at all, and it was just kind of dead. Like, and I didn't get it why people were laughing so hard. Like, so like in itself, that was very awkward. And I'm like, kept thinking like that happened a few times, and people were laughing pretty hard throughout the whole film. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what's this? This isn't very funny. Like, it's just kind of dumb. And it happened quite a few times in this movie. Although I will say there were certain moments in this movie where I was laughing pretty hard. I did kind of get it, and I did think it was generally really funny and kind of twisted. I like the darker aspects of this movie, of course. Paul Rudd was great, but it just it there were for me too many moments of where it was just dead air and dead space where it kind of took me out of the movie a little bit. And so this movie ultimately became it was fun seeing it in the theater and it was fun seeing it with people who were into it, but there were a lot of moments where I felt like the odd man out. I didn't really get the humor. and and from what I gathered that this movie was really kind of is a movie that was is really a that was made for Tim Robinson. It's like his it's just him going off basically for 2 hours. Because and it's kind of funny and kind of weird in its own way because Tim Robinson's like in every scene of the movie and his character never like shuts the fuck up. Like he's always talking and he's literally in every scene and he's always like kind of doing this his comedy like constantly. And I felt like by the last when it got the movie's about 2 hours and the movie started at 7 and it was over by 9. And about the last 50 minutes I was kind of a little bit ready to take a break from him. That was my feeling. I felt like it was it was a little bit too obvious that this movie was just him and it was just about his comedy shtick. And it was a little bit too much. It was no like I felt the ensemble cast was good, and I thought the family dynamic that his family and the son was really funny, and Paul Rudd was great in it, and I thought there was some good chemistry, good actors in the film. The ending was pretty interesting, but I felt like he was on I don't know I felt like he was on screen too much, and it was too much about him like all the time. It was funny for a while and kind of until it wasn't, if that makes sense. And it kind of dragged a little bit that way and it was a little bit repetitious, and it kind of fizzled out for me. And then I enjoyed the experience, but then after I saw it on Thursday and now it's Saturday, and since some days time has gone by, now it's kind of, meh. I'm kind of like, meh. I wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't go see it again. I wouldn't go see it again. Definitely wouldn't go see it again. But there's again, it's a mixed bag. I think there's some really good comedy in this film, and again, there is some from a filmmaker's for as far as how this movie was made. Again, it's got some really cool things. The music was really great. Some really cool cinematography. It definitely tries to do something different with a story that we've heard many, many times. The story is totally straightforward, but it's kind of told in a different way and in a unique way. But I do think it does suffer from like this thing that has been happening with A24 of where I feel like the filmmakers in this movie, the people involved with this movie, particularly around the direction, like they're trying too hard to make the movie unique and different and hip and cool. Like they're just trying really hard to do these things as opposed to like, well, just don't get wrapped up in these ideas that you need to like be innovative and be so highly stylized and so you know, so new and fresh, as opposed to just telling a good story. And those things, if the story's really good and the chemistry's really good, and in this case it's a comedy, if the comedy's really really good, all of those other things will fall in place. And it feels like this movie was trying a little bit too hard to be different. And that's a thing that I've seen with A24 lately, where I feel like that's been happening more and more with like their more recent releases. And it can you know get you to that place as a viewer of like, well, maybe they're just this company, like with their films that they're putting out, they're kind of getting up their own ass. I think Beau is Afraid was like a perfect example of that. I mean, that movie was, I think, unwatchable because it just like crawled so far up its own ass, and it was just like, okay, you're just being different to be different. There's no thread, there's no like cohesiveness to this. You know, you're more worried about how you're going to tell a story as opposed to just telling a good story. And I feel like when a good film is made, all of those other things, the uniqueness of it, maybe the different colors that the film might have around it, or the different emotional things, those things will come into place. And I think those things are secondary, because if that happens, it's usually because the script is really good, and it's, you got a great ensemble cast and it's a good story. Not the other way around, where you're like, okay, we're going to make this really interesting artistic film, and then we'll, really dial in the dialogue. And I feel like this movie kind of suffers from that. It tries a little too hard to be different, too, with a story that we've seen a billion times. Pretty mixed bag for me. I thought it was funny, and I did enjoy some things about this movie really good, really well. Um, but it's pretty mixed ultimately. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I wait usually a day or two after I see a film, because you got to let things sometimes resonate with with yourself. So that's, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.